It's a great honor for me to be presenting at the eDARE 2022. Uh, since I have just 8 or 10 minutes, I'll jump right into my presentation. The title of my presentation is Rethinking Minjung Theology, Reflection on its Implications for the 21st Century. In my presentation, I will talk about Minjung theology in the Korean context, namely Minjung Sinak or Minjung theology, literally meaning people's theology. And I'll focus on its characteristics, recent developments, and implications. Minjung theology arose in South Korea in the 1970s, and it underwent 3 periods of development. First, a development phase in the 1970s, during which the focus was on the exploitation of laborers, because that's when Korea was undergoing a rapid industrialization. The second phase in the 1980s focused on the democratization movement, because Korea was at the time suffering from decades of authoritarian regime. And the third mature phase since the 1990s marks Minjung theology sort of expanding its focus to other issues, including human rights, sexism, and peace, including reunification of the 2 Koreas. Turning to the characteristics of Minjung theology, this theology focuses on what Jesus did, not on who he was, and it asks, how does God act in history, instead of questioning who God is. A key word in Minjung theology is Minjung, which literally means the people or the masses. Son Nam-dong, a leading Minjung theologian, argues that historical Jesus was Minjung, who identified himself as a poor and an oppressed person who underwent great ordeals, much like Korean Minjung. And central to Minjung theology is a unique Korean concept of Han. Although it is difficult to exactly translate the term in English, Han can be referred to as deep-seated grief, sorrow, or despair. Han articulates not only personal griefs, such as poverty, illness, or discrimination, but also bitterness felt collectively as members of a group, including a nation. The root of Han is being wronged, and it includes, among others, people's Han against their ruler, women's Han against the patriarchal system, a nation's Han against an empire, the workers' Han against the capitalist, the tenant farmer's Han against the landowner, and so on. Minjung theology is thus the theology of Han, the inner dynamics of the oppressed Minjung, Korean Minjung. And Seol makes an interesting argument that Christian theology, which until now has been preoccupied with the problem of sin, needs to focus more on resolving the Han of the people, because the latter is more meaningful than being forgiven for committing sins. Seol further argues that although relieving Han, that is, provision of spiritual relief from unfair circumstances, can be an important function of religion, if its role is limited to just that, religion can only serve as an opiate, which is akin to Marx's view. Seol emphasizes that relieving Han must involve an element of protest and praxis. Turning to Minjung theology and its recent developments, and I will really make this short. From the late 1980s onwards, with the country having attained a remarkable economic growth and having become a democracy, Minjung theology turned its attention to other issues, as I mentioned earlier, including the issue of reunification with North Korea, women's rights, human rights of both foreign migrant workers and marriage migrants, and environment. Interestingly, Minjung theology has inspired the emergence of many religiously motivated NGOs, which are essentially civic groups fighting for various causes in Korea. The most prominent religiously motivated NGOs in Korea include, among others, the Catholic Human Rights Committee, Catholic Women Groups Alliance, Christian Alliance for Justice and Peace, Korean Christian Environmental Movement Solidarity, Buddhist Coalition for Economic Justice, Buddhist Alliance for Activism, and so on. Although concerned with disparate, wide-ranging issues, these groups are united in the belief that religion can be and should be a force of reform and change in society. In conclusion, like liberation theologies elsewhere, Minjung theology has newly envisioned the role of Christianity in Korea by interpreting the Bible from the perspective of the poor and the underprivileged. Liberation theology as a whole shows that religion can play an important socio-political function for individuals in contemporary society, serving as a means to remedy injustice and oppression that persist in today's world. Liberation theology shows that religion can actually make itself more relevant to people's lives today by becoming more actively involved with social issues. And this point is important because studies forecast that religious influence will not decline in the near future. And this will be attested to by the fact that the proportion of the religious population in the world population will actually increase in the next half century. So this is where the concept of ecclesiastical social responsibility can become relevant. This is something that I came up with. I don't know if someone else thought of this, but it goes like this. ESR is inspired by the concept of corporate social responsibility, which can be defined as actions that appear to further some social good beyond the interest of the firm and that which is required by the law, including a pyramid of responsibilities toward the community in which it operates, including ethical, environmental, and philanthropic responsibilities. So in view of CSR, ESR can be defined as actions that appear to further some social good beyond the interest of the church and that which is required by the doctrines. At this point, it is worth asking questions inspired by liberation theology. How can religious organizations remain silent about hunger, poverty, injustice, violation of human rights, and oppression, which are still affecting so many people in many parts of the world? Instead of asking, why should religion be involved with social issues, we should ask, why shouldn't religion be more actively involved with socioeconomic and political affairs so that life on earth is more livable and hopeful? This is important because, as you'd agree, religious organizations as a whole are the most powerful, wealthiest NGOs. And it also has a strong organizational structure and a large number of devotees who can easily be swayed for socio-political actions. You know, even mundane organizations like corporations are being concerned with social responsibility. Why not religious organizations? And my last point is this. One of my favorite quotes of all time is by Jonathan Swift, the author of Gulliver's Travels. Quote, "We have just enough religion to make us hate, but not enough to make us love one another." To paraphrase it in my own way, we have just enough religions to make us indifferent, but not enough to make us care for one another. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. If you stop sharing, and I'll invite Jin Young. Your time to respond to Andrew, please.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you so much, Dr. Kim, Andrew, for your rich insights on Minjung theology. It is beneficial to share your perspective as a sociology of religion scholar. I hear that Minjung theology can revitalize religion to serve both spiritual and social needs in Korean society. When many argue about the decline of religion as evidence of secularization, your proposal for revisiting Minjung theology is a constructive move. I'm more concerned about Minjung theology itself and its place today than religion. Highlighting this conversation in this year's eDARE conference is timely, especially as CWM friends remember the passing of Minjung theologian Kim Yong-bok, and as we recently commemorated the centennial anniversary of the birth of An Byung-moo. The question these first-generation Minjung theologians asked are worth revisiting, yet in the new context of a Korean society, which has dramatically changed. Minjung theology was a theology of witness in the 70s and then a theology of movement for democratization in the 80s. What has changed since the inception of Minjung theology? After the 90s, third-generation Minjung theologians refocused on the suffering of Minjung. But this time, they are others. Minjung are others within the nation, outsiders in the social system. We live in the post-Cold War era, shifted from the so-called third world under industrial capitalism to the fate of the global South under neoliberal global capitalism. South Korea has been significantly influenced by US-led neoliberalism in the post-communist era period of the 90s. Despite the financial crisis in 1997 and again in 2008, the people still suffer. 2020 marked the 50th year since the death of a young textile worker, John Tail. He set himself on fire and died in protest against the oppressive working conditions at the Pyeonghwa market in Seoul. This event triggered Minjung movements and caused theologians to discover and stand with Minjung. Yet, the endless litany of laborers' death has persisted until now, including the tragic death of 24-year-old irregular worker Kim Yong-kyun in 2018. She was inspecting the station's operations at a power plant, got stuck in the core conveyor belt and died. Someone called so many deaths of irregular workers within the 10 years, the outsourcing of danger and death. Just a week ago, a 23-year-old female worker died at a bread factory, working a 12-hour overnight shift from 8 p.m. the previous day. Can we believe that this happens again and again in a country whose economic ranking by GDP is the 10th in the world? So today's Minjung are the outsiders of the social systems, The question is how Minjung theology can listen to or communicate with Minjung when their language is stolen by the dominant system. Minjung theologian Jin Young Kim said that they suffer aphasia or speak only the distorted language as they internalize the imposed mechanism of exclusion. How can we attend to the handwritten, nonverbal, or unspoken language of the nameless and the helpless when they cannot communicate in the society? If Minjung theology established itself in the dominant language system, particularly as a Korean brand of liberation theology, it could hardly hear or translate Minjung's language. As long as Korean Christianity as an institutionalized or corporatized religion seeks to hold power, privilege, and wealth, it couldn't listen to voices from the margin. Releasing or easing applies to liberation theology as well, and it would not be easy. Yet Minjung theology does not focus on the goal of future salvation or redemption, but Minjung, the subject of history, and their present suffering. It leads us to attend to their continued and intensified suffering across the globe, because oppressions are all connected under the dominant global order and side with today's Minjung. Thank you.